Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day. I hope you have enjoyed yesterday evening. We're going to start this day with Lightning. Jameson is leading this session.
All right. Yes. So, I've been working at least on top of Lightning for about a year now. We've been shipping a lot of nodes so that people can participate in this network and help experiment and expand and figure out how to make the most use of this new protocol, which is still pretty bleeding edge. And we're seeing a lot of developments happen, and I think that there's a lot of both technical challenges and economic challenges that will need to be overcome for Lightning Network to really get to where we want it to be. And so seeing new innovative ways of actually using the protocol, I think is going to be very helpful for people like myself to try to implement these things under the hood just to make it a better user experience for everyone. But without further ado, Bastien Teinturier with Trampoline Payments.
Thank you, Jameson. So first talk of the day, I know that many people are jet lagged, but I'll try to make sure no one falls asleep in the next 30 minutes. I'm Bastien, and I'm working with Async on the Lightning Network on the Eclair implementation. We are one of the oldest implementations of Lightning. We started many years ago, and we are active contributors to the spec as well. We operate the biggest node right now on the network, and we also developed the first Lightning wallet for Android, Eclair Mobiles, so we have a good idea of what happens both on the server side and on the mobile side when you're running a node. And the subject today, I'm going to talk to you about trampoline payment, which is an idea that we have on how we could improve the mobile apps experience with Lightning. So first of all, what is Lightning? I expect that most of you already know that, so I'll be quite brief. But Lightning is a layer 2 payment channel solution meant to help scale Bitcoin payments. The idea is that users put funds in a multisig to have 2 output on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then they're able to update channel balances completely off-chain via peer-to-peer messages. So it's supposed to be really fast and very scalable. What's important is that it's a network. It's not only payment channels, it's really the network part that helps the thing become scalable, because you don't need to open a channel to everyone you want to pay. You are able to route your payments through other people's channels, and that means that if you have a channel to Bob and Bob has a channel to Alice, you are able to pay Alice. And this is really important because every time you open a channel, you need to do an on-chain transaction, which takes time to confirm. So it wouldn't be very fast nor very scalable if you needed to open a channel to everyone you wanted to pay. So when you are paying with Lightning and routing through other people's channels, there are 2 important parameters that you need to take into account. These are the fees and the lock time delta. Basically, intermediate nodes in a route will ask for fees to cover their operational costs, because running a Lightning node is not completely free, and you usually also run a Bitcoin full node, so you have to pay for that. And they will also ask for a lock time delta. This lock time delta is some kind of safety window to make sure that intermediate nodes cannot lose funds in case a payment times out for some unknown reason downstream and a channel closes. It's really to protect the funds of everyone in the payment route and make sure there's no way they can lose that money. So, for example, imagine in this example that Alice wants to pay 2 Bitcoin to Carol with an expiry at block 1105. Bob is saying that he takes a flat fee of 0.1 Bitcoin and a proportional fee of 1% with an expiry delta of 14. Alice takes that into account, calculates that if she wants to send 2 Bitcoin to Carol with an expiry at block 1105, she needs to send 2.12 Bitcoin to Bob with an expiry at block 1119. When Bob receives that payment, he collects the fee, he verifies that the lock time window has been correctly applied, and since everything is well, he's able to forward the 2 Bitcoin payment to Carol at expiry 1105. And you can use obviously longer routes. It's just repeating this process recursively until you find the right amount to send to the first guy in the route. So you might notice that this means that Alice needs to know what fee and log time delta Bob wants to apply. And the way we do that right now is by using a very simple flooding gossip mechanism. Basically, Bob is going to create what we call a channel update message, where he says, I'm going to collect that much fees, and I want that delta to be applied, and he's going to send that to all his peers. Then these peers are going to wait a bit, then propagate that to all their other peers. And this way, everyone eventually learns everyone's fee in the network. And at the end, you end up having the fee and log time delta for every channel in the network. So as you can guess, this doesn't scale well, because that means this grows linearly with the number of channels in the network, and we don't like things that grow linearly in computer science. So there's got to be something that we can do that helps that, because this is going to consume both a lot of bandwidth on every node, and this is going to make storage consumption and RAM important on the mobile nodes. So right now, there are a few important properties in the routing that we will want to preserve, and I'll present those in this slide. So some of those in this slide. So one of the important properties that we have in Lightning today is that everything is source routed. That means that the sender decides on the exact route that the payment will take. This gives a lot of flexibility to the sender, because since he has the whole network graph and can choose the exact route, that means he can run a pathfinding algorithm to completely minimize the fees, or he can choose to use a longer route to get more privacy, and everything is up to the sender. So that's great, but that comes at a cost, because that means that the sender needs to have all the information needed to be able to compute those routes efficiently. And that's a cost that will keep growing linearly as the network will grow. Another very important feature of Lightning payments is that they are trustless. For that, we use HTLCs, hash time lock contracts, which allow those payments to be trustless, but at the cost of locking some capacity for a potentially long time. I will not go into details about how HTLCs work, because that's mostly orthogonal to routing, but you can find a lot of great resources online if you want to dive deeper. And another very important feature of Lightning payments is that they are private. For that, we use onion encryption. We use a cryptographic scheme called Sphinx. That's a specific onion encryption scheme that allows us to make sure that any intermediate node in the route cannot learn where they are in the route, who the payer is, or who the recipient is. And that's a very important property for Lightning today. And this has an interesting consequence that even the recipient doesn't know who the payer is. And that can be useful for use cases such as donations or charities or whatever you can think of. There is also even a proposal to make the recipient anonymous from the payer. This is based on Tor's rendezvous routing, and this may be implemented in Lightning in the future. So those are all a lot of very good features that we want to maybe keep, but they come at a cost for the sender. It means that the sender has to synchronize all the information about all the network. This costs a lot of bandwidth. This means that the sender also has to run pathfinding algorithms on a network that is becoming bigger and bigger. This costs a lot of CPU and drains your battery if you're a phone. And this means you also need to have a lot of RAM, because running graph algorithms on the network means you need to have everything in RAM. So, okay, so at this point, I've explained mostly at a high level how routing works in the Lightning network today. So you should have a good high-level view of how it works today. So now that brings me to the more interesting result, an impossibility result with bananas as well. And that's what I call the Lightning payment triangle of success, because I like fancy names, and triangles and impossibility results are cool. So my idea is that I don't think we can achieve both the three properties of this triangle in a peer-to-peer payment system like Lightning. Right now, we are on that edge on the left, where we're able to achieve good privacy and route cost optimum. Route cost optimum means that since you have all the information of everyone's fees and log time delta, you can choose to minimize your fees by just running simple graph pathfinding algorithms. And it's important to note that we're not exactly at the middle of the edge. We can choose to be anywhere on that edge depending on how we configure our node. If we want more privacy, we can use longer payment routes. And if we want less fees, we can use shorter payment routes. We really don't want to be on that edge ever because that means we would be giving up privacy entirely. And I don't think we want to give up privacy for reasons. What I'd like to focus on for the rest of this talk is this side over here. The idea is that we still want to have good privacy, but we want good performance, because right now on this side, we are achieving both root cost optimum and privacy at the cost of performance. And we'd like to be able to get privacy and performance by paying a little more fees. That doesn't mean that this side won't be possible anymore. What we want is just to give users the possibility to choose what their trade-offs are. We're not replacing this algorithm at all. We're just enriching the network with another possibility for users. So how do we achieve that? So first of all, let me recap what led us to this need. As I said before, we operate the biggest node on the network on the server, and we also develop one of the leading mobile wallets. So we've been able to see things that work and things that are starting to degrade because of the network's growth. And our server node has been running very fine for more than a year on mainnet. So we're good on the server side, but we've seen the app's performance degrade a bit because the network has been growing so much and there are so many channels right now. And this is a trend that we expect will continue. So what happens right now when you want to make a payment on the mobile app is that a mobile node, Lightning node, is offline most of the time because you are in the subway. You don't want your phone to be connected all the time and syncing a lot of stuff because that drains your battery, bandwidth, mobile plan, and everything. So when you launch the app, it will start by connecting with the network and syncing the channel updates that it has missed. And this is something that takes time and consumes a lot of bandwidth, whereas what you want is just pay something. You want it to be instant. And once you have synced all those channel updates, you also need to run a pathfinding algorithm to find a route to the guy you want to pay. This drains your battery and consumes resources as well. So it takes time and it delays the time where you're able to send your payment. And I think that's an issue because what we really want to do is that this is a payment app. So you want to just take your phone out of your pocket, scan a QR code, and boom, have a payment being sent instantly. It should be quick and simple. That's what users are expecting from payment apps like Apple Pay, WeChat, or others. And I believe that Lightning should be no different. So how do we achieve that? The basic idea is that a very simple way to improve performance is to just stop syncing the whole network. If you don't sync the whole network, that means you consume less bandwidth. That means the app starts faster. That means you have a much less expensive pathfinding algorithm to run because the network you're going to run it on is going to be much smaller. And that means a lot of benefits. And the idea is that we'll want to just trade fees for performance. We just want to pay a bit more our routing nodes and being able to not sync the whole network because we pay a bit more. So as I said, the main issue is that this is going to keep growing linearly with the network. Every channel added means one more channel update to sync and one more node to add to our pathfinding algorithm. So this is not going to scale well. That brings me to our idea, trampoline routing. And it starts with what I said. We just, instead of syncing the whole network, we're just going to sync a small portion of the network. For example, in this graph, we chose to sync only our 2 radius neighborhood in the circle here. We are that node here. And what if we chose to only sync nodes that are no more than 2 hops away from us, or 3 hops away from us, or 4 hops away? That's a very easy way to prune our network graph and to only sync a very small portion of the network. And we're not going to sync only that because otherwise we would be completely blind to the rest of the network. We're going to sync our neighbors plus some randomly selected trampoline nodes from the network. And now when we want to send a payment to that node right here, we're going to start by selecting a trampoline route. That means we're going to pick a few random trampoline nodes, node 2 here and node 1 here. And we will want our payment to go through this node and then this node. So what we do then is that we create a small onion that commits to this trampoline route that says, I'm going to start with this guy and then this guy. And this is a smaller onion than the onion we use today. And then once we have committed to that route, we want to select the first trampoline node to be in our neighborhood so that we can find a route ourselves to him. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take our trampoline onion, find a route to the first guy, put that onion in a normal payment onion, and send that to the first guy. When that first guy will receive the normal onion, he will peel it, discover that there's another smaller onion nested inside that, peel that onion, and in that onion, he will find instructions to route to node 2. There will not be the route to take, just instructions to say, you need to route this payment to node 2. Now node 1 will run the pathfinding algorithm himself, find a route to node 2, send him a normal payment onion with a smaller trampoline onion inside. And this is going to repeat until it reaches the destination. And so what's interesting in there is that this is only possible thanks to a recent change we made on the Sphinx onion encryption, where we allow variable length onions to be put for each payload. What we had before, what we currently have is that for each payment, we're sending a 1300 bytes onion. And the way we divided that before between all the nodes in the route is that everyone had a 65-byte payload. But now we changed that so that we can choose exactly how many bytes we send to each of the nodes in the route. So here, that means we're able to send a smaller onion, which is 400 bytes, in the last payload of the normal big onion, which is 1300 bytes. So let's pause for a minute and think about what just happened. What's interesting is that our node here only had to find a very small route in a small network to the first onion here, to the first trampoline node here, node 1. And when node 1 received the onion, he just found a normal onion and he didn't realize who the payer is because it's onion encryption and he only knows that guy here that was right before. He only discovers that the next trampoline hop is this guy here, but he doesn't know if this is the last one or if even before he was the first trampoline in the route. So it looks like we're preserving most of the privacy properties we want, and it even looks like that we're improving the anonymity set. That's not something that we can easily demonstrate, and I'll let people, we need to formally analyze that, but it looks like we should be good on the privacy side. And it means that here, Alice, when she starts the app, only thinks a very small portion of the graph and has a very easy pathfinding algorithm to do because there aren't many nodes. So effectively, she's trading fees for performance because she's letting node 1 here compute a route for her and paying a bit more fees for that. So this looks simple enough. Why not deploy it? Oh, already a few questions, yeah?
Why would she want to route through two trampoline nodes and not just one?
Because if you route through only one, that means that guy here, if he knows there's only one trampoline node, he knows that the next guy is the recipient. So you're leaking the recipient to that trampoline node. If you can use more than one trampoline node, that means the anonymity set makes this guy not sure that the next node is a recipient or a next trampoline node. That improves the privacy, basically. Yeah?
What is the incentive of the trampoline nodes to find the lowest fee? Because they can just, because they don't pay the fees, so.
I'll get to fees. Yeah, they do. I'll get to fees in 2 slides and I'll start explaining that. Yeah?
Will you get into how you choose to and how you maintain the list of the trampolines?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as you already saw, there are quite a few gotchas. It's all trade-offs. This doesn't completely come for free. So I'll dive a bit in some of the things that need to happen for that to work. So as you saw, this is mainly the main thing we want to reduce is bandwidth consumption for mobile nodes, and because this is what takes most time when you start the app before making a payment. So in order to do that, it's not just this onion construction that saves you. You also need to prevent peers from sending you gossip that you're not interested in. So the way we were going to do that is by negotiating gossip filters on peer connections. When you're initializing a connection to another peer, you're going to negotiate some filters to tell them not to send you some unwanted gossip, some unwanted channel updates. So this looks a lot like BIP37 filters, but it doesn't have the same DOS attack drawbacks, because in Lightning, peers are only keeping connections alive when they have a channel to the other guy. So there's an economic cost to every connection, so this is less attackable. So what we will definitely want to have a filter on channel updates based on the radius, because the most effective way of pruning your network is to just say, I just want to keep my neighbors up to 3 hops away or something like that. And what's interesting with this filter is that it's really cheap to apply for the filtering node, at least if n is small enough. And if n is really big, then you can just reject the filter and say, no, I'm not going to honor this filter. Don't try to make a connection to me. And market incentives make it so people will find a good a sweet spot where people agree to apply that filter. We could also have filters on other channel features like channel capacity or something else. I don't know, we'll see what we add later, but I think the most important one to begin with is just the n-radius filter. And as you said, we also need to synchronize some trampoline nodes that are outside of your neighborhood. And for that, that means we will want to receive gossip from them to know their fees, but we don't want to receive it for everyone. I think that my choice right now would be to use a probabilistic filter, because you want to just use a subset of the network trampoline nodes, but since you don't know the network topology, you don't want to choose them explicitly. So you could just apply a probabilistic filter to choose what node updates you're going to receive, what trampoline node updates you're going to receive. And if you want more privacy, you should rotate that set regularly by just changing the probabilistic seed. So you could ask your peer to just XOR the node ID of a trampoline node with something like the latest block hash, and if it's less than some value that's half, for example, the max value, that way they forward it and you get half of the trampoline nodes. And that's something that we could tweak. Of course, this needs to be applied before forwarding the gossip, because if we receive gossip that would drop, we still consume bandwidth and we didn't gain anything. And the important part, the part that's really tricky, is the fee estimation, because as you might have noticed, that means that Alice needed to know how much fees she needed to send to the node 1 to let him forward to node 2. So how does that happen? The idea is that Alice doesn't know, when she chooses trampoline nodes, she doesn't know how far they are from each other, because if she could know that, that means she would know the whole network, which is what we wanted to avoid in the first place. So she's in the dark and doesn't know how far trampoline nodes are between each other. But she still needs to send a high enough fee to let node 1 route to node 2. So how does she do that? A way she could do that is that we could ask trampoline nodes to send a message that advertises their global fee and global log time delta, which would be the value that would allow them to route to any other trampoline node in the network. For example, if we take this very simple graph here, if Bob advertised this value, it would allow him to route to any of the gray node in the network. That's something you can somewhat easily compute once you have the whole network graph in RAM. But I think that we can be smarter than that. And I think that this is a great opportunity for trampoline nodes to implement custom heuristics depending on their connectivity and knowledge of a graph. Because sometimes you will receive payments that ask you to route to another trampoline node that's very far away from you, and in that case it will be expensive. But sometimes you will also receive payments for another trampoline node that's close to you, and in this case it will be cheap. So instead of always broadcasting the worst case fee, you can broadcast something that's like the median, and that would make you route some payments at a loss, but gain an overall benefit. And I think it's interesting because you're still going to receive more fees than with normal payments, and you're going to be giving users on lighter nodes a very useful service on the network. And there will be market incentives for fees to be competitive between trampoline nodes. And it will kind of force them to increase their connectivity to important override nodes in the graph and improve the graph connectivity as a whole. Another feature I wanted to mention is that AMP, multi-part payments, have a really good synergy with trampoline payments. Because what we do right now with multi-part payments is just the idea that we want to be able to split a single payment into multiple sub-payments that are either all paid atomically at the same time or all fail. And they're great, we want them. They're probably going to make payments more reliable, and they will allow you to make bigger payments on Lightning, even though if you make a really big payment, that should probably be on-chain. But they're still useful because they also help your anonymity set, and they can decorrelate, make payments harder to track. But the way it will work in the first iteration is very simple. It's the sender who will decide how to split a payment, and all the intermediate nodes will just route those payments blindly. And with Trampoline, we can be a lot smarter than that, because we can aggregate multi-part payments at each Trampoline node and then choose how to split to get to the next node, because we have a better view of that area of the graph than the guide that came before, so we can find a more optimal way of splitting the payment, because that's the hard part in AMP right now. It's really finding how you could split the payment, knowing that that the balances on the channels you're going to use are not available to you, so knowing how to split is really hard. But in Trampoline, what makes it really easy is that Alice, the first node, has a very small graph to analyze, so she can really find the most optimal way to split to get to the first Trampoline node. In this example, she split her payment into 3 payments. But when it reaches that node discovers that he needs to route to that other node, and he probably has a better view of that part of the network than the first node, so he's able to find a way to send it with only splitting into 2 shares. And when it reaches that node here, maybe he has a big channel to the destination, and he doesn't even need to split at all. So that's something we cannot do without Trampoline because of the way payments work right now and the onion works right now. But with Trampoline, we're able to make that happen. And I think this is a great improvement for AMP's reliability. Another great improvement is that if you do normal AMP, when that fails, you need to fail all the paths and restart from the beginning. Whereas here, if that fails here, you only need to retry that part, and you don't need to go all the way back to the sender to refine another way to split. Okay, so this probably looks like a big and scary change, but once you really dig into it, it's really a quite incremental change, and it works really nicely with the existing payment infrastructure, because all the HTLCs and the way we forward them will just work. There's nothing to change in that. It's only changing the onion, adding something into the onion construction, and a bit of logic to relay payments, and add pathfinding in intermediate nodes. But really, it's not that hard. And it's really easy to roll out, because you can still use legacy nodes to route between Trampoline nodes. They don't need to know that the whole payment is a Trampoline node. They're completely blind. They just know that they have to route to this other guy afterwards, and it just works. So it's easy to roll out, and that's why we're already implementing it in Eclair, and we will roll this out soon to improve payments with our mobile app. It's also a first incremental step towards hierarchical systems. If the network becomes really huge, and we can't even ask Trampoline nodes to have a view of the whole network, we will need to divide the network into zones or something like that. And that's something that Trampoline can easily adapt to. I'm not saying that we have to do it today, or I'm not even saying that we have to do it in the future. Maybe the network doesn't grow that much in terms of public channels, maybe only in terms of private channels. But if we need it, we are taking a first step that allows us to go into that direction later. So that will be great. So another thing I want to stress is that we'd love to get more feedback on the proposal. The proposal is detailed, and there are a lot of important details that make this either work or not. So we'd like more eyes on the proposal. So if you're interested, just follow the links to the mail thread and spec PR, and just come comment or just come talk to me anytime, basically. So I hope I kept you awake for those 30 minutes and I didn't bore you too much. And I know that was a lot to take in. And so just if you have any questions, don't hesitate. There's a lot of new stuff in there, so it's normal to have many questions, and there are no silly questions. Thank you. Yes?
Is there any reason not to sync the, maybe a weighted graph between the trampoline nodes that you're keeping track of in terms of fees and deltas, so that you don't have to use heuristics?
Yeah, I think what I presented in the first proposal is the simplest one, but there are probably a lot of ways to optimize it. For example, even trampoline nodes, when they are sending their fee and their log time, they could also send a small list of other trampoline nodes that are close to them. We can also add in the invoice a trampoline node that's close to the recipient so that the sender just uses that one because he knows that this is close to the recipient. There are a lot of hints that we can do that would help using those trampoline nodes. We are not including all of that at the beginning. We're going to start with the simplest version and improve it as we go and as we test it on the network. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff we could do like that. Yeah.
Is there a way for the sender to specify that the recipient should, in an atomic multipath scenario, the recipient should receive a certain number of final payments on the route?
The way we're doing AMP right now is that you don't specify how many shares there are because that might change if one of the payment fails and you need to resplit. You just specify the total amount that the recipient is supposed to get, and that's enough to make him check that he received everything. Yeah.
For me as a node operator, is there any downside in order to run a trampoline, or the other way around? Would you expect in the future every node to become a trampoline node?
I expect in the future that every beefy server machine will be a trampoline node because it's more fees for them. And usually, when you run a node right now, it's not CPU that's you're not using 100% of your CPU. So if you could, here you're basically just doing pathfinding for people against fees. So you have that CPU available, so you definitely want to do that. So I think that, if you're running a node on a real server, something that's reliable, you really should run Trampoline. And I expect that's what people are going to do because it's more fees for them, for CPU that's otherwise idle. But for smaller nodes that are online all the time but running on Raspberry Pis or things like that, maybe it's not a good idea because it will take more bandwidth and more CPU. But for real server machines, I expect that, it's a net win to run Trampoline.
Do you think that mini-sketch technology could be useful for the reconciliation of the graph?
Yeah, we started investigating that with people at Chain Code. We started trying to apply Minisketch to optimize the gossip in the Lightning Network. We have some ideas, we have some first results, but we're still far from a real prototype. Basically, it's quite different from Bitcoin, so there are ways we can use Miniscript, but it might not be as good as the benefits it adds to Bitcoin. So we're investigating it. It might help a bit the gossip, but not enough to still sync the whole graph on a mobile phone.
Because you don't know the difference between the two data sets, probably. So
estimating the number of differences is really harder because, exactly.
Continue questions offline.
Yeah, don't hesitate to come and ask me questions offline. Thank you.
By the way. So Pedro used to work on Silent Whispers, and he knows about the murmurs. We're operating.
All right, so moving on, next we have Patrick McCory, who is an assistant professor at King's College London. And in 2016, he actually began a PhD focused on Bitcoin against the advice of the other folks in his department. And I believe it was one of the best decisions that he believes he has made against other people's advice in his life. But he's made a number of contributions in this space over the past few years. And today we're going to be learning about the most recent. Is this pronounced PISA?
Yeah, PISA. Yeah,
okay, it is PISA, a financially accountable watching network. So let's get this on the road.
Awesome. Cheers. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, so yep, this is called TESOD, and it's a financially accountable watching network. It was based on some research we did 2 years ago, and very recently I decided to quit the university and pursue this full time. So hopefully I'll give the motivation why I did that during the talk. So as most people are aware, this is like basically an off-chain Lightning Network, session. Before I get into my slides, who's heard a pitch before where a blockchain says they can achieve 200K transactions per second? Raise your hand if you've heard that. Okay, a lot of people have. Raise your hand if you ever believed them. No one. Oh, 2 people you believe them. Okay, please don't invest. No, so basically I have this slide here where an off-chain protocol, what's really exciting is that there's one transaction to join the off-chain protocol. And I always stick a big number here to be a bit bullish and to be a bit cheeky. But actually what's exciting about off-chain is that all communication between Alice and Bob is local. It's the only scaling solution where 99% of the transactions never actually reach the global network. So Alice and Bob have a coin and they're just going back and forth rapidly like this. So really your only downtime is the network latency. And what's exciting is that if this takes off as a scaling solution, we bypass all blockchain latency and fees as well. But what's important is that if we want off-chain to work, we need to guarantee the non-custodial property such that there's no counterparty risk whatsoever between Alice and Bob. Now, what does an off-chain network actually look like? And this is mostly my opinion, so please take it with a pinch of salt. What you sort of see evolving is this peer-to-peer routing network. And that's the Lightning Network. What's really exciting there is that you can imagine let's just say 100 paths, Alice to Bob, Bob to Caroline, etc. Different paths being set up and executed at exactly the same time. So the throughput there is actually based on the size of the graph, the collateral locked up, and whereabouts, how it's balanced. It's very difficult to compute the upper end of this TPS, just because all transactions are local between the parties. Then what's sort of evolving are these non-custodial hubs. Oh, what I should also mention is that what's really exciting about this is actually truly peer-to-peer. So who in this room, for example, has a Casa Huddle node? Yep, there's a few hands raising up. Awesome. Who's run a Lightning node themselves? Awesome, look at this. Definitely a Bitcoin conference. That's really cool. And that's exciting. Anyone in this room can lock up coins, join this routing network, and start participating and collecting fees for routing transactions on the network. That is actually a truly peer-to-peer technology, which is why it can actually achieve some ridiculous throughput. On the other hand, what I'd imagine in the future is that most payments will happen on non-custodial hubs. And we see this today with eClair, Bitrefill, etc., etc. We set up these, we connect to a hub, they allocate us some collateral, and we send coins on the network. What I'm excited for, and hopefully Georgios will talk about it later, is something called a commit chain like Plasma, where with Plasma, I can set up a non-custodial operator, have millions of customers, and there's no collateral lockup whatsoever for me. The customer deposit coins, then I facilitate the transfer from Alice to Bob. There's actually this one coin moving between the two parties, and I don't have to have payment channels with them. Once you have Plasma evolving, what you're going to see is thousands of internet service providers all running Plasma, with Lightning in the middle or some channel-based network, such that Alice over here can transfer coins to Bob over there. Then the final piece of the puzzle is this watching network, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. What the watching network really should do, it's more like an insurance policy and takes on the financial liability for users who want to go offline. So you go offline and you have no counterparty risk because they take on the financial liability for you. Now normally and then there's the blockchain. The blockchain is no longer used to process every single transaction. Instead is this settlement layer where you can join an off-chain protocol, leave an off-chain protocol, and settle disputes. Now, when I show this to people, they're always like, Patrick, that's a blue sky vision. You're too much of an academic. This is never going to take off for work. But then you look at the companies. People are actually out there building this today. As we all know, we have the Lightning Network, but we've got taught by Eclair. We have Lightning, Blockstream, and a bunch of Ethereum companies. And they're all building these channel-based networks. Then you have Starkware, Liquidity Network, and Plasma Group that are building these non-custodial hubs. So this is definitely under development right now, and everyone in this room has had to play with it and tried out Lightning. So that's why I'm extremely bullish that this is really going to be a real scaling solution that will actually work and take off, which is why we've dedicated our time to building this watching network. Cool. So there's going to be plenty of talks about channels and Plasma later today. So what I want to talk about is briefly is how Lightning channels work under the hood, and then deep dive into the watching network itself. So how does Lightning work? Okay, so Alice typically has a transaction that she can broadcast, and Bob has a transaction that only he can broadcast. Every time they do a payment, what they're going to do is exchange transactions. That basically represents the new state of the channel, the balance of Alice and Bob. They'll exchange the new state, and then they revoke the old one. In this case, they may share the preimage of a hash. And what you end up with in Lightning is one latest state that only that party can broadcast, and you end up with a set of revoked states. And this will become crucial later on, and it'll lead to some problems for watching networks. Okay? So the question is, what if Alice stops cooperating? You know, Bob has sent $1 million to Alice. Alice has gone offline. Maybe she wants to go buy a Lambo. What is the risk if she goes offline? The risk is that Bob discovers she's offline. He broadcasts the older state where he still has the $1 million. Then this triggers his on-chain dispute process. Alice must respond by block 100. You know, there's 100 blocks here, or I guess 90 blocks in this case. Otherwise, Bob's going to get all the coins in the channel, and he's going to get his $1 million back. So blocks are being minted, and Alice hasn't yet responded. But what does Alice respond with? If Alice was online, how can she resolve the dispute and make sure she keeps her $1 million? This is called a justice transaction, where pretty much she provides sufficient evidence that this was indeed a revoked state. And if she can prove that, it will penalize Bob, and Alice will get all the coins in the channel. This is why it's called replaced by revocation. You prove it was revoked. So she'll get the justice transaction, she'll sign it, and broadcast this to the network. Once it gets in, the blockchain will say, well, Bob broadcast this transaction, and Alice, proved to me she provided sufficient evidence that it was indeed revoked. Such that Alice gets all the coins in the channel. So that's great. Now, one question is, what about the justice transaction? Is there just one justice transaction that Alice needs to keep around? No. There needs to be a unique justice transaction for every single state that was ever agreed in the channel. And that's going to become problematic later on. Now let's dive a little bit deeper under the hood and look at the transactions themselves. So we have this funding transaction on the network that sets up the channel, and we have two channels, or two transactions, one only Bob can broadcast and one that only Alice can broadcast. This is omitted for now because it's basically symmetric. Let's look at the outputs. There's one output that represents Bob's balance, and it basically says, Bob, you can claim your 0.5 bitcoins after time t. Otherwise, Alice could claim the coins if she reveals the preimage of a hash, the revocation hash. And of course, the second output is Alice's balance, and she can always get her coins immediately. And then the justice transaction is basically just this. Alice spends both outputs, she reveals that preimage of the hash, she claims Bob's coins, and then she claims her own coins as well. And that's basically at a high level what a justice transaction looks like under the hood. Cool. So now we know how Lightning channels work within a 2-minute nutshell. So what about this watching network? So what I'm going to do now is hopefully provide a short historical perspective on how these watchtowers have actually evolved. So back in Scaling Bitcoin 2016, Taz presented the first solution called Monitor. And I like this, it's actually quite neat. Okay, so what does Alice send to the watchtower? So what we have, as I mentioned, is Bob's transaction and Alice's justice transaction. She'll have to pre-sign this in advance. Now what Alice is going to do is get Bob's transaction, get the transaction ID, and split it in half. The transaction locator will be given to the watchtower. The second half of the transaction ID will be the encryption key. Now what she does is she gets her justice transaction, she gets that encryption key, and she'll encrypt the justice transaction. So now it's locked. You can read it, but the watchtower can't read it. Okay? And what she's going to send to the watchtower is this transaction locator and the encrypted justice transaction as well. Now, the important bit is that every time Alice and Bob do a payment, the watchtower must be given a new transaction locator and a new encrypted justice transaction. So if you've done 1,000 payments, the watchtower has to store 999 transaction locators and encrypted justice transactions. So it's order and storage. Okay, so what if Bob actually cheats and broadcasts this revoked state? What will the watchtower do? Well, it's really simple. The watchtower extracts the transaction ID. They look up the transaction locator. They'll find the corresponding justice transaction. They now have the decryption key. They decrypt it, and they broadcast that to the network. Boom. And then the watchtower saves the day and resolves the dispute. Awesome. Now, there is the good, bad, and ugly with this protocol. It's 2016, 1 year after the Lightning paper. So what's good about it? Channel privacy. The watchtower has no idea what channel they're watching. All they get is this transaction locator and this encrypted blob. They have no idea what channel they're watching. And that's a very nice benefit that I've only appreciated recently. It's also a very simple protocol. All we have to do is store encrypted blobs. When we see a relevant transaction, we decrypt it, and we just broadcast the transaction to the network. And what's important to highlight is that a watchtower is a responder and doesn't trigger disputes. All we can do is respond and not trigger disputes. What's the bad? Well, there's a congestion problem. The watching service can only broadcast a pre-signed transaction. If you don't set a good enough fee, the transaction won't get accepted into the network. And that's a big problem. This channel could be alive for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you gave me this justice transaction 4 weeks ago. You have to try to predict future fees. And there's order and storage. There's quite a lot of storage for the watchtower. And finally, the ugly of it is that it hopes for availability. You hire hundreds of watchtowers, and you just hope one of them respond. If they don't, tough luck. That's your problem. Back in 2016, this was sort of the view of how a watching network would work. You'd hire multiple watchtowers, and they only get rewarded if they successfully resolve your dispute. So the justice transaction has a bounty. If you get it in, you get the bounty. And obviously that's not very great, because now you have this order and storage problem. You can store junk, actually, because all you're getting is an encrypted blob. It could be the encrypted word of Taj. And then if you respond and you don't get in, because you're competing with everyone else, you don't get the reward. Okay, then Watchtower came, as everyone knows them today, called Watchtowers. And this was presented at BPACE. Now, what I want to highlight is Watchtower was proposed based on the L2 proposal. Okay, so far it doesn't work on Bitcoin. But the idea in L2 is that you have a signature from Alice and Bob, and you effectively have this counter. So every time Alice and Bob do a payment, you just increment this counter from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And then when there's a dispute, so you trigger the dispute here. And then you just send that signed message. And whatever signed message has the largest counter will be considered the latest state. And based on whatever that balance was, you get the coins. Now, what's nice about this? All I have to send the Watchtower is, again, that transaction locator and that signature and the counter and the state. Now, what they propose in Watchtower, which I agree with, is that you should also pay the Watchtower in real time. Every time I give them a new job, the Watchtower should get some form of payment for storing that. And then if there is a dispute, all we do is look up the transaction locator, fetch the one thing we had to store, because all we have to store now is the largest counter, and we just broadcast that to the network. And then we resolve the dispute in a very straightforward fashion. But of course, this also has the good, bad, and ugly that comes with it. What's good about it is that there's a verifiable job. I'm no longer storing encrypted blobs or junk. I at least understand that this could be used to resolve some form of dispute in the future. There's order 1 storage. All I have to store is the latest counter. I don't have to store a list of encrypted blobs. And finally, it separates the transaction and the state. And that's important. As a Watchtower, I get the state. I can compute the transaction myself. I can set the fee myself, and then broadcast this to the network. So now you no longer have this fee problem, because the Watchtower can set the fee themselves. The bad bit is that there's still no accountability back in that proposal. You hire the Watchtower, but you have no evidence that you've actually hired a Watchtower. And there's no financial deterrent. There's no way to penalize this Watchtower if they don't do their job. But of course, the ugly is that this requires a new opcode, a new consensus rule. And this is why these conferences are really important. Part of these talks is to motivate that we need these new opcodes, because it really simplifies building layer 2 protocols. Now, what about PISA, what I'm presenting today? So TESOD doesn't really care about the underlying payment channel construction. They could be monitor-style jobs that sort of work today. They could be L2-style jobs that could work in the future. And there could be outpost-style jobs. So this will be a talk in about an hour's time. So I'm not going to reveal the details of that yet. You can all enjoy it when the presenter talks about it. Now, what does TESOD propose? TESOD proposes a signed receipt. Very straightforward. If I hire the watchtower, I should get a signed receipt that I've actually hired the watchtower. And I can prove that people have hired a watchtower. And there should be on-chain evidence as well. Given a signed receipt on the blockchain, I can prove to anyone that TESOD did not do its job. I can actually hold TESOD accountable. Now, in the TESOD paper, we also propose the TESOD contract, where TESOD locks up a security deposit, let's say $10,000. If anyone can prove TESOD cheated, you provide the evidence, and then TESOD is either forced to refund you or TESOD gets slashed. So there's some financial accountability there. But of course, that needs a new consensus rule. You effectively need to support SPV proofs, parsing a receipt, and maybe covenants, although maybe you can get away with not having covenants. So how does TESOD work? And this is basically what we're building today. You send over the transaction locator, and again, the encrypted justice transaction. TESOD will send over the signed receipt. Now, what is this signed receipt? Basically, it includes the encrypted justice transaction, the transaction locator, when does the appointment start and expire? We're not going to watch it forever. The minimum dispute period, because it's very important that TESOD can actually resolve the dispute. If you set it to 1 block, well, we can't get it in 1 block. And there's a signature by TESOD to prove that we authorized it. Now, bonus points that I don't really want to present here is that TESOD could be hired via the Lightning Network in such a way where we give the user the signed receipt, we get the payment, and it's only valid if we get paid. And it's a very simple HTLC transfer. The receipt only becomes valid if the customer knows the preimage of a hash. And you just do a simple HTLC transfer. So that's great. We can now give signed receipts over the Lightning Network in an off-chain manner, and we don't know what channel we're watching, but we get sufficient information and get paid at the same time. Okay, so what about this scenario? Bob triggered a dispute, TESOD failed to respond, and Bob gets the coin. How do we prove the wrongdoing here? Well, we have the signed receipt. So what we can do is that anyone can verify the transaction locator was found, it was within the correct blocks, block 11, block 100, and for now we assume the dispute time is fine because I don't want to display another transaction. And anyone can decrypt the injustice transaction and they can verify that it was indeed a valid transaction and it didn't get in the blockchain. So this is great. You can post this on Twitter and shame the watchtower for not doing their job. And that's important. There's some reputation going to be involved in these networks. But as I mentioned, we can only achieve reputational accountability. We cannot yet achieve financial accountability on Bitcoin. With a new consensus rule, we can somewhat achieve that. So let's look at the good, bad, and ugly of this proposal. The good is that because of the monitor protocol, we again get channel privacy. TESOD has no idea what channel they're watching, and that's a great feature to have. It's again a very simple protocol. We're effectively proposing right now to add a signed receipt. Simple engineering. And it's accountable. Anyone can prove that the TESOD tower has cheated. The bad is that, depending on the channel construction, there's still order N or order 1 storage. But I should have wrote there, so far there's always order N updates. We still have to be notified about new information every time there's a payment, which isn't great. And the security deposit can be hard. We have $10,000 locked up. We could be watching $1 million of channels. If we're watching $1 million of channels and you have no idea, then we may be incentivized to cheat. So one cool idea would be to do proof of liabilities, where I can prove to you my assets, the $10,000, and my liabilities such that I'm under-collateralized, or over-collateralized. And the ugly, again, is that we need a new consensus rule. Now, what I want to highlight is, what are watching networks for Bitcoin like today, given everything I just presented? Okay, so there's no financial deterrent. We have channel privacy. Today, there's order N storage, which is a bit annoying for a watchtower. We can achieve reputation accountability. What is annoying is that the transaction and the state are still intertwined, so we can't bump the fee. Replace by fee either doesn't work or is extremely awkward, and that's a big problem for watchtowers. But we can do this fair exchange of payment and signed receipt via Lightning. So you can pay us on Lightning, and we can give you some signed receipt at some point. It's a simple protocol, very simple for us to implement. No verifiable job, we can still store junk. Again, we're a responder, and we trigger. And my last little clause is that all of this can be improved with consensus upgrades. So consensus upgrades should seriously be considered for layer 2. Cool. Now, where are we? So I want to have a little picture of Sergey there. We had a talk yesterday about Transaction Probe. He's been leading the development of our Bitcoin Watcher, and it's at a state now where we can do private testing. So if you're a hobbyist or a company and you just want to try out our little watcher, get in touch, and you can at least be our guinea pig and see how good our API is. All we basically have is an API, and you can send us a job via the API. What we want to work on is a signed receipt bolt, so that wallets can actually have a standard they can follow to store signed receipts and maybe display them to their users. And actually what we also need is a Watchtower bolt. So we want to work on that as well, because we need a standard for Watchtowers that everybody can follow. Now, my final words about Watchtowers. A lot of people have misconceptions about what a Watchtower can do or what they're useful for. From my perspective, a Watchtower is a responder of last resort. It's a bit like insurance. You get car insurance, but you're not reckless. You still try to protect yourself. Watchtowers are the same. We're there to protect you if you get DOSed. And ideally, they should take on financial liability. If you go offline, you should have some guarantee of a refund when you come online, and the Watchtower doesn't do its job. Now, what can a Watchtower do? A Watchtower can protect you if you get DOSed or if you crash. It protects against cross failure. A Watchtower will not protect you if you get hacked by an insider threat or your signing key is stolen. And that's really important. Only cross failures can a Watchtower protect against. Now, what about even a market for watching? What would a watcher look like even for profits, so that there's an incentive to run this? As I mentioned, for the routing nodes, if you're joining the Lightning Network in the future, you're likely going to create a channel in a path where you can maximize your fees. Maybe it's a busy path, maybe it's a weak connection and you're connecting it up. You're going to maximize your fees, and you're going to have to connect to strangers. If you're connecting to strangers, you can't trust them. So if you're running a routing node, you'll probably hire a Watchtower directly. But if you're a hub, most of us trust our hubs. I have an Eclair wallet, I have like $30 on it. I don't think Eclair is going to steal my money. Maybe they get hacked, I don't know. But now these companies have potentially millions of users who are all adversaries, who may attack them, DOS them, crash them to steal their money. Awesome. So basically, I suspect hubs will hire Watchtowers directly for their users, and routing nodes will hire Watchtowers. And I just want to finish on this slide, because basically, this network is coming, is evolving, is being built. Half of the room here have at least tried out Lightning and played with it. Within 1 to 2 years, this will actually be how most users interact with these networks. I hope there's a day where I don't have to use the Bitcoin network and pay for the fee. I can use this hub, and I can send coins to another hub, like Santander to Monzo, for example. Although I don't want to say banks, because this is much better than banks. Fully auditable, publicly verifiable, and permissionless. Unlike banks. Is there any questions? Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. So how do you prevent spam? So this really depends on the reward mechanism. Oh, do you mean spam on the network, or do you mean spam for the... Spam to Pisa. So ideally, one way we've been thinking about is either we get paid per job, like some half a penny to pay for storage. Otherwise, there's some subscription model where you get up to 10,000 jobs. We haven't decided what people would actually prefer. I mean, for watching networks in general, how they would work. But generally, they should pay for the storage. Yep.
So you can have a case where the Watchtower protects Alice and Bob.
Yep.
Without knowing you're on both sides. How does that affect the model? Or you just be honest and just do the right thing?
Well, this is why I think it's really important to be financially accountable. If you're hiring Alice and Bob, because if I'm watching $500 and I have $10,000 locked up, if I cheat either of these parties, I'm always going to get slashed. So that's why I think it's very important to have this financial accountability to protect in that case.
But let's assume that's still far away.
Yep, it is far away. So right now it's just reputation, which is much weaker. Yeah, that's the best answer I got.
Yeah, just saying, you don't know as a
oh yeah,
right? Because you don't know the channels You can
No, yeah, that's it, yeah.
ensuring both sides without, you know.
Yes, let me clarify that. Okay, awesome. So he's basically saying if I'm watching Alice and Bob, does the watchtower know? And in this case, they don't. I get 2 different transaction locators and 2 different encrypted justice transactions. Yeah, so I have no idea if I'm watching the same channel or not. Any other questions? Yep.
Sorry if I missed it. What is the opcode in particular that you're missing? Or is it actually just anything that enables L2?
Anything, I mean, there's 2 parts. So L2, there's various ways to implement that. I think it's like up, checks, message from stack, stack seg from stack, yeah, that opcode, whatever. That's for L2. For us, we need SPV proofs, ideally. What we really need to do is, given an output, we should be able to historically look at 2 transactions and see if the justice transaction get in. So that's like the Blockstream sidechain, for example. They require SPV proofs. Yeah, but there's no explicit opcode yet.
Like flag line proofs? Or like
Something like that, anything around that realm. Yeah, I haven't got anything in particular in mind. There could be different combinations. Yep. I think right now it's probably too early to think about the exact opcodes. I just want to make sure people actually use watchtowers before we even consider that. Any other questions, or am I out of time?
We've got a quick break coming up. So.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I can take one more question if there's time. Yeah, go for it.
So in the receipt, you have the second part of the TXID is the
Encryption key.
Is the encryption key. So Bob, like the counterparty, actually has access to the
Yep.
whole, so he can decrypt these justice transaction. Is there anything that you could do with the justice transaction so when he signed to like?
So if we, let's just say PISA learns the justice transaction for whatever reason, we can't broadcast that unless Bob triggers a dispute. So all we can do is respond to.
No, I'm saying that Bob now has access to the justice transaction.
Okay.
Signed justice transaction.
All he can do is penalize himself. If you think about it, if he triggers a dispute and then broadcasts his justice transaction, he gives all the coins to Alice. Yeah, nothing really he can do there. Okay, I guess that's it for now. Thank you guys for listening. Cool.
All right, quick, say 14-minute break. Meet back here at 11 or so.
Yeah, 11:05.
Yeah, 11:05. All right. Very good.
It's always, you're usually the best session chair.
I'm Dan and representing your slides last night. Rainbow Network.
Let us see. Rainbow.
Yeah, great. Okay, and then it's PDFs and notes and just.
Yeah, there's a clicker just left, right, and such. All straightforward. There's going to be, we'll hook you up. This is for video streaming, and this will do the countdown.
So I'll just come up after.
Well, I'll be rallying everybody in. You're next?
I think so.
No. Now it's going to be the Tejashri, then Margareta, and then you are right before lunch.
Okay.
Somebody came to watch you present. I don't know, somebody. He didn't have a ticket, but.
Oh, Matt, my coworker. Yeah. There was a big time with that. Yeah.
So that we don't keep falling behind here. So we're going to continue along with our lightning talks and really focusing on these layer 2 technologies. And today we have Tejaswi Nadahali from ETH Zurich, or is it ETH Zurich? ETH, yeah. So much name reuse in this space. Sometimes it gets confusing. But he's going to talk to us about this Outpost lightweight responsive watchtower.
Thanks. So I had to actually call it ETH and expand it out to its German equivalent because, ETH is tricky. Like I had my badge saying ETH Zurich, and people thought I was from some meetup group in Zurich. So anyway, so the name is Outpost is kind of a throwback on Age of Empires, if anybody's played it. So it's like a watchtowers, which is much lighter, I guess. Anyway, moving on. This is a joint work between a professor in University of Alberta and our group in ETH Zurich. So we have a bunch of papers on Bitcoin and Lightning stuff back in the day. Christian Decker was in the same group, and he graduated with a PhD, I think the first PhD in Bitcoin space, I guess, back in 2015. So this is our work. So let's enter, I guess. Okay. So what's happening? How did we get here? So that's from XKCD for people who know. So yeah, so this is a kind of familiar story. So 7 transactions per second, not a good place to be. So then, we have channels, good place to be. But I'll go offline, not a good place to be. And then, watchtowers. But then as Patrick mentioned in the previous talk, the storage cost is quite high for watchtowers. And they really don't know what to delete, what to keep, how long to keep them. It can kind of grow unbounded. So storage is a kind of a big cost that we are trying to work on in this particular talk. So my proposal is to store the cost, put the cost on the blockchain. That sounds ridiculous because the blockchain space is kind of precious, and we are saying store that 10 terabyte watchtower storage in the blockchain. Not really, but yeah, we'll see how that can be done and still not be done. So because my talk is going to be a little bit about structure of the Lightning transactions, I would give a kind of a quick overview of Lightning channel structure. It's kind of done before, but my notation is kind of slightly different, so it helps to follow this notation a little bit. So this is a Lightning channel structure. The top part is the opening transaction. I'll kind of give the legend a little bit here. So there's UTXOs from A and B, Alice and Bob. The one on the one which says _ A is kind of spendable or broadcastable by Alice. And the small squares are the transactions, and the UTXOs are kind of well represented. So this half is Alice's half of the channel, and this half is Bob's half of the channel. And for people who know this, or just as a reminder, in Lightning, both halves keep their own versions of their commitment transactions, so to speak. And these are these commitment transactions, which I call them as CTX for lack of space. So this opening transaction is broadcast on the blockchain only after Alice and Bob have the corresponding commitment transactions with them already. So if people are familiar with this, we can kind of move on. So the happy case is this bilateral closure, as they call it, where Alice and Bob are done and they want to close. They just agree on how to split the money, and then they kind of move on. And the blockchain sees the Lightning opening transaction and then the closure transaction, and nobody is wiser. It's all good. But the whole point of having so much complexity in these commitment transactions was to prevent this idea that if Bob goes offline and Bob cannot sign this combined UTXO that they had both agreed on, what does Alice do? So here, there is this idea that in Lightning, if whoever broadcasts their transaction has to suffer some time penalty, and the other person gets their money immediately. So if they go offline as well, they get their money immediately, but the broadcaster has to kind of suffer a little bit. So it's not that much. So this is the whole idea that if Bob has gone offline, Alice has to broadcast a transaction. She spends that combined UTXO with a time lock, and once that transaction is committed on the blockchain, she can then wait for the time lock to expire and then kind of take her money herself and make this new UTXO, which is her own, to spend whenever she wants to spend. So this is this unilateral closure, and this is why one of the reasons why Lightning constructions are kind of so complex. And then there is this bad cheating closure where Alice decides that she will go back in time. She'll pick that one particular transaction which is very favorable to her, and then she'll broadcast that instead because Bob is gone offline. So what happens here? She does the same thing. She broadcasts the commitment transaction which is previous, and then but she has to wait for some time t so that she can sweep the money for herself. But there is this OR condition here which allows Bob, if he is online, to just sweep the money immediately. So that's the whole lightning penalty, which is kind of well known in this community. So if Bob goes offline, what happens? Somebody else has to do this for him. And we call them monitor, watchtower. There are a few names, but let's stick with watchtower for now. And we'll go to outpost eventually, but yeah, for now it's watchtower. So what does Alice do? In this case, Bob has gone offline, so what does Bob do? So what Bob does is he's scared of this particular commitment transaction that might come in the, that might appear on the blockchain. So he says, okay, if that appears, I want to broadcast this. I have it all signed and I have it all ready. I will just encrypt it, as Patrick was saying in the previous talk. I'll use the suffix of that transaction's TXID as my encryption key. Let's say I use AES 128 for encryption. I construct this blob, which is just a blob. And then I use the prefix as my transaction locator, as Patrick again called it. And I will make this so-called justice kit. So this key value pair is my justice kit. And I'll send this justice kit to the watchtower. And the watchtower, just sees a bunch of these TXID prefixes of transactions that have technically not yet appeared on the blockchain, and a bunch of blobs. So the watchtower, as again Patty was mentioning, are completely oblivious to what's happening in the channels. They just see these blobs, these prefixes, and these blobs. But the point is, there is no really end to this. So every channel that they watch, with every update that every channel has, keeps adding to these. So this key value pair is probably the kind of biggest key value pair map which can ever be, I guess, because there is really no way for the channels to tell the watchtower to stop storing or deleting old stuff. So watchtower has to make policy on LRU or FIFO or something to kind of delete stuff, or they might just store it forever. So there is a lot of policies there. But the idea is that this storage is kind of inevitable in the current construction. So we kind of looked at things a little bit deeper and see what we can do there to take away the storage. So one thing we kind of realized is that the cheater has to store the previous transaction to be actually able to cheat. They really can't construct it out of thin air because they have to actually have it from the past. And the cheating commitment transaction has its corresponding justice transactions right there. So this is important because there's kind of a one-to-one mapping between the cheating and the corresponding justice transaction. And the commitment transaction has to go on the blockchain to be able to cheat. Now, is there a clever way to store this justice inside the cheating action? That'll be kind of philosophically cool as well, where the justice comes with your action. So anyway, let's see how we can store this. The naive way is, hey, so what are the ways of storing arbitrary data in Bitcoin transactions? The the approved way of doing it is this so-called operate on instruction, where you can store 80 bytes of arbitrary data in a Bitcoin transaction. So here's the justice transaction. I copy it, I encrypt it, I store it. That's cool. So now if this commitment transaction goes online to the blockchain, anybody watching it can read it. The outputs are right there. It's all plain text. Decrypt it because you have some key to decrypt it, let's say, and then you broadcast it. It's all good, right? So what went wrong with this naive scheme? The naive scheme actually suffers from the reason which necessitated or which motivated SIG hash no input and all these other developments, and I'll kind of elaborate on that a little bit more in detail. The problem is Bitcoin's transaction ID. Bitcoin's transaction ID is actually constructed with inputs, outputs, always together. So the inputs and outputs have to be committed in the transaction ID. And that's the reason why we have the signatures which are kind of kept outside before you kind of construct the transaction ID as well, or before you sign the transaction as well. So what happens is, the transaction is completely constructed. You SHA-256 hash it twice, or is it once? I'm not sure for the TXID, but I think it's twice. And then you get the TXID. But this is the TXID, sorry. This is the TXID that is actually used in the justice transaction itself. So the commitment is there. The justice wants to spend the commitment, but to spend it, it has to refer to it. Once you get the referenced thing encrypted, you can't store it back in that because that will change the transaction ID of the commitment itself. So this is like this self-referential, self-loop problem that we couldn't really avoid with a naive way. Are there other ways of storing data in the Bitcoin blockchain which is allowed by the consensus protocol but is not accepted, let's say? So there is a so-called P2SH data drop method, which is what has been used in the past to store random data like Simpsons figures and Mozart songs and porn and whatever else, right? So the idea is here you have a P2SH redeem script which allows you to like push and pop arbitrary data in the Bitcoin execution stack, and that is used to store arbitrary data. In this case, it doesn't work for us because there is this malleability issue which kind of screws with us a little bit. And there are some details here, but it doesn't work. Then there is, to avoid the malleability, there is this hashing method which kind of commits to that data, but that doesn't work because that runs into the same self-fluke problem that I talked about in the TXIDs. Then we have Ccache no input, which will work obviously because it prevents, you can have justice transactions refer to a commitment transaction without actually really signing on to it. So Ccache no input would solve our problems, but of course that needs changing the Bitcoin protocol, and we are advocating for it, but we are not fans of it. It's kind of a tricky place. But if that happens, then you can build L2. Well, you don't need Lightning at all. So this whole thing is kind of collapsing if that comes up, for us at least. So we'll assume the Ccache no input is not there, and let's see what we can do without it. So we have outposts. That's our proposal to construct this clever way of storing justice inside the commitment. So what we do is we open up the commitment transaction into, instead of two outputs, Alice and Bob, we have this carrying output, which is an auxiliary epsilon just above dust value, which is used to do clever things. So as usual, justice transaction is going to be giving all of Alice's balance to Bob. So that is going to spend from Alice's balance. So this first part here is Alice's balance. This is Bob's balance, and this is like something waiting still to be pending. So Alice's balance can be spent and given to Bob completely if Alice cheats. That's cool. Encrypt that, make a blob, keep it ready, and then you spend this kind of arbitrary small transaction again to give that, and then store this data in that transaction. And now you force this to be published on the blockchain by making the real commitment. In Lightning it was all just commitment, here we call it commitment 2. We force this one to be published by forcing the two outputs of two separate transactions to depend and actually be present on the blockchain for this to be able to spend. So this is kind of our clever trick where we are having this auxiliary transaction as a vehicle to carry this encrypted justice. And now instead of one commitment transaction per state update, we have 3. But nothing of these 3 is ever seen on the blockchain, hopefully. So we are good. So how we keep the time lock? We lock these two with a bit 68 style time lock, and that prevents this from being published till these have been in the blockchain for 144 blocks or whatever is the current standard in Lightning. So this is kind of the main construction, so to speak.
Is the UTXO AD of epsilon the same one?
Yeah, it's the same value, but they're different UTXOs, yeah. And they're both required to be signed by Alice and Bob. So we have an ePrint paper out as well, so you can kind of read the details of how the transactions actually are exchanged. What is the diagram to kind of, what is the state machine? How does it like go from A to B, B to A? When is this keys exchanged and stuff like that? And the key part here is the encrypted blob has to be decrypted as well. So in Lightning, you exchange the so-called revocation key as a part of your state update. So you want to go from state 1 to state 2. To invalidate state 1 while negotiating state 2, you give the state 1's revocation key to your counterparty. So in this case, it is the decryption key for this blob that you give to the counterparty. So there is kind of this parallel there as well. Okay, this is the money slide. This was in the end, and when I was giving a prep talk in my group, my advisor said, you got to like motivate it with like some real money in the middle. So we'll get to this again, but the key part is this slide here, this part. So we are claiming that with 20K channels with 1 million updates per channels, the entire watchtower can be built with like 1 megabyte of storage. That's pretty cool. So we'll see how we can get there. Oops. Okay, so one thing I want to kind of emphasize here is Lightning, the Outpost keeps Lightning's key features. And the key features are the broadcaster has to wait, as I was saying. So Alice has to wait if she's either cheating or if she's doing unilateral closure, which is a nice closure as well. And instead of exchanging revocation keys, as we do with Lightning, we exchange AES 128 decryption keys, which are similar. Okay, so I want to go through kind of scenarios of cheating and of closure to see how this actually works. So in the cheating case, which is what kind of we are trying to prevent, so Alice broadcasts an older commitment and auxiliary commitment in our case. And Bob is watching the blockchain. Bob sees this. He has the keys to decrypt because as a part of the state exchange, he had actually gotten the previous decryption keys. He decrypts the justice, broadcasts it, and once that is confirmed, as you can notice here, once this transaction is confirmed, there's a previous justice transaction. Sorry, let's go back to the justice transaction. So once this is confirmed, that UTXO AB becomes invalid, as in it can't be spent again. So if Alice cheats and Bob does justice, Alice cannot do her own commitment transaction afterwards. So Alice cannot actually broadcast her own CTX because its input has been spent by the justice transaction. That's cool. Unilateral closure, a more classic case because people kind of disappear offline at the latest state. They're not trying to cheat, they're just trying to experiment, whatever. So in that case, the state update has happened, but Bob does not have the latest key for the latest state. Bob disappears. Alice disappears, and Bob really cannot do anything. He just can take his own money, and that's kind of okay. So there is another class of attacks called griefing, which are more common when there are more complex protocols, because you could do things which are not a part of the protocol, not to profit, but kind of just grief the other person, so to speak. So in this case, Alice doesn't broadcast it doesn't broadcast both the transactions as we want it. It only broadcasts one of them. And in this case, what happens? So in this case, we have this idea where we claim that the savings that we are proposing are applicable to the watchtower and for Bob as well. So Bob doesn't have to store all the previous states as well. So if he has the previous states, he can just escape by submitting his own CTX1B, which is evident from the diagram before. But if he doesn't have it, then the watchtower has to help him. So let's get to that as well. So yeah, what I mean was, in this case, if CTX1A, which is the commitment transaction, gets broadcast on the blockchain, and the vehicle which carries the justice doesn't get published, then Bob has if he has his own justice, he can broadcast it. But if the justice transaction is not published, then there's a couple of clever tricks to do this, but they are a little bit more, I would say, unhappy for me. So I'll kind of get to that if somebody has real questions on these. Okay, so here is what we are doing in kind of a nutshell. The similarities are basically, in classic Lightning, we have only the commitment on the blockchain. In Outpost, both commitment and the encrypted justice is on the blockchain. In classic Lightning, the justice transaction is in the node, which is approximately 350 bytes, and that kind of keeps expanding. In Outpost, we have only the key to decrypt it in the node, which is only 16 bytes in this case. So this is where the savings are coming from. What are the costs? So it's not for free. The costs are basically, we have 3 instead of 1 commitment transactions. But these are like, off-chain transactions which are being exchanged. They never hit the blockchain, so it's not too bad, we think. And there is this epsilon value that has to be attached to this auxiliary transaction, which can reduce the value of how much can be transferred between Alice and Bob in the channel balance. So the channel balance was 10 Bitcoin. Alice paid 5, Bob paid 5. We have to reserve this 0.2 for this thing, and Alice and Bob can only transfer between them 9.8. So it's a bit of a penalty, but it's not too much, we think. What are the limitations? Can we do this right now? Operator is limited to 80 bytes, and our encrypted justice transaction will be approximately 400-ish bytes. So what do we do there? It's not a Bitcoin consensus thing. It's more of a Bitcoin core thing where they have this standard limitation, which is on top of the consensus rules. So there is a way to get around this. We can actually split the auxiliary commitment into 2 separate parts and do some hacks to kind of stuff the data inside it. It's not pleasant, but it's doable. And again, my argument is that these transactions will never hit the blockchain, so we are okay doing this. This is bloat, obviously. So we have 3 versus 1. No, it kind of sucks. But there is no changes to Bitcoin blockchain at all. Bitcoin protocols at all. There's no SIG hashes, no opcodes. Even the Lightning opening transaction looks the same. Even the Lightning closure transaction looks the same. So with some of the transactions which are exchanged off-chain in Lightning, they can be modified a little bit. We can get this insane savings for watchtowers. Can you optimize this even more? So there is this old technique called the SHA chain, which was published by, I think, Taj and maybe even Rusty Russell a few years back. The idea is, if you want to have these keys which you have to give to your counterparty, like say 1 million keys you want to give it to the counterparty, and you want not to store all the keys yourself, or you want to not store all the keys on the counterparty side, you kind of derive this key chain where you start with a random seed, you hash it 1 million times, you start with the last one, and you give it to the counterparty as the first key. And then in the next iteration, you give them the n minus first key or n minus 1th key. And if they want to go back, they can just hash it and derive it themselves, but they can never come back all the way. So this trick lets you only give one key and just keep saving that one key all the time, and you can derive all the other keys as you want out of them. Of course, there can be more optimizations. You can build trees out of this, and there is like some more clever stuff. But for illustration purposes, the chain is good enough. So there's a SHA chain where instead of using just AES keys randomly, we just use AES keys chain built out of this network or this structure. And that gives us even more savings. Of course, this can be done in another clever way, which is you use RSA keys. So what you do is you start with a random number in the RSA space, and you decrypt it. And you keep decrypting all the way, because any arbitrary number can be decrypted in the RSA space. And you get your kind of last key, and you start with that and build up the chain. So these are both like optimizations where you can link a bunch of keys together where you can create them both ways, but your counterparty can create them only one way. And for them, they can't kind of go into the future, they can only go back in the past. And that's the structure you want. So, and the SHA chain sounds like it's pretty bad because you have to pre-compute like 1 million keys, but it's actually really fast. So it's not like that bad. So now, if you have these keys kind of linking channels, you lose some privacy. So what that means is the watchtower knows that this particular channel has had 1 million updates, or 3 updates, or 8 updates. And it had updates at 3:30 in the morning and 3:33 in the morning. So you leak this amount of data where you tell the watchtower what is the volume on this transaction in some sense, in this channel in some sense. You don't leak the balance or the parties, but you just leak the idea that this channel is very active or this channel is very inactive, and what times it was active. So we believe that this is not too much of a privacy leak, but it's a debatable thing, I think. But if we give up this amount of privacy, we get this crazy amount of savings where we say that if the watchtower is storing one key and one TXID per channel, it's good enough to actually save the channel kind of anytime anybody cheats. And that is like per channel you have this one row of data. That's O of 1 storage in some sense. So with 20K channels, we just get this kind of storage. But of course, if we don't give up the privacy, we want all the privacy, we still kind of save an order of magnitude. So typical Lightning implementation will have like 8 terabytes across these numbers, and we'll get like 1 terabyte. So it's still not too bad, but it's not as good. What do we do next? We have to work on HTLCs, because this is just the single channel construction. If you have HTLCs, these 3 extra things that we added kind of become their own beasts. So we have to work that out a little bit. And we have to still implement this so that we can actually have our own nodes running and see how this works in practice. The advantage here is we don't have to change the Bitcoin protocol, so we just have to change the Lightning spec a little bit and kind of implement our own nodes and change the way the commitment transactions are exchanged, which I think is far easier than other things that has to be done. So this is that key message. Can we store justice transactions inside commitment transactions? And I think we can. That's it. All right. No questions? No. Okay.
More questions. Maybe she's saying the justice transaction is like 400 bytes or something massive.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you just need a few pieces, and then whoever is broadcasting it can construct it from those pieces.
Those pieces are actually 400 bytes.
Oh, only the pieces.
Yeah, only the pieces. So if you go to the Lightning implementation in LND's code, there is the so-called justice kit struct that has. So the idea is basically the signatures are big. So the signatures actually make up the space. So you don't have to construct the full blob. You just need the signatures and the revocation addresses and a bunch of other things. Those things actually make up the space.
Does it get any better with Schnorr?
I don't think so. You still have to sign. So
Because you have some music things you can.
maybe I haven't thought it through. Possibly, but it's still you have to still get the signatures, and the signatures can't be linked together.
You can get it under 80 bytes, so already a lot less.
Probably. But the thing is, you can't link them together, so you still have to store it. You have to get the signature and still store it somewhere. So we argue that you don't have to store the signatures at all, because the signatures are stored on the commitments themselves. So there is advantage even otherwise if the signatures come back as well, but it's less advantageous. You're right. But I'm not sure whether it can be that small as well. So I have to look that up a little bit. All right? All right. Thank you.
Next up, we have Dan Robinson. And Dan is a research partner at Paradigm, which is a, have we changed it? Let's see. Let me pull it up. What? Ah, next day. Ah, all right. Yes, I did skip forward. All right.
So Margarita.
Yes, so Margarita with Akai. Have you spoken about this before? No, all right. I guess I may have read about it then. But yeah, we're going to be learning about yet another type of backup protocol. So essentially, one of the big issues that we're running into with Lightning is how do we deal with the fact that this is a protocol that basically relies upon you being online at least a decent amount of the time. How do we handle the different failure scenarios? How do we make it robust enough that if you do run into a critical problem, you don't end up losing all of your funds? So hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties this time.
No, just give me a second, please. Okay, you're not here.
I know the state of Lightning wallet backups has been kind of sketchy up until this point. We dealt with some of the AEZ backups for L&D with the CASA node that we put out, and unfortunately realized after a while that a lot of people assumed that, much like with what you run into with Bitcoin wallets, you figure, hey, I have a seed. If anything goes wrong, I can back up everything that I need. So as long as I keep that seed safe, I'm good. But of course, with Lightning Network, you have actually a lot more information, in fact, non-deterministic information that's getting generated on the fly as you're updating your channels, as you're actually transacting and routing on this network. So we end up needing to have other more sophisticated backup solutions for this data that is unknown at the time of wallet creation. And I think we're going to see a number of different ways that we're going to create more robust backups. We've got the watchtowers and ways to basically handle completely adversarial scenarios where your channel counterparties are going to try to act against you. And we still have a number of other scenarios where something could just go completely wrong on your end, even if nobody is trying to harm you. So hopefully Akai will be able to help with that. Are CASA users running Lightning? Yes, I mean, we have quite a few nodes that are running Lightning out there at the moment. So these are all nodes that are running L&D and Bitcoin Core, but the users themselves are running it on their own. And we're trying to help them basically manage their own nodes, much like with our multi-sig wallet, we try to help people manage their own keys. With any of this, though, it's kind of like the ultimate problem of self-sovereignty is all the responsibility that comes along with it. Is how do we, as like the really techie, enthusiastic crowd who are basically spending our lives worrying about this stuff and trying to manage our own nodes and servers, how do we make this accessible and feasible for the normies to be able to do themselves? Because I think if we fail to bridge that gap, then we're going to end up with everybody just using custodial key services like Coinbase and exchanges, or custodial even Lightning Network providers, which they all have their pros and cons, but we at least want people to have the option. That optionality is, I think, what the real freedom of these protocols and networks is giving to everybody. That's the power of it. You can still choose to trust a third party if you really want to. Unfortunately, we did not have enough time to verify the technical setup beforehand.
I think it's the adapter, actually. Do we have another USB-C adapter? Let's try this.
How many engineers does it take in order to set up a presentation?
Okay, here. Yes. That's right.
And this is why you also need redundant hardware. You never know when you might have a critical failure.
Well, my favorite yesterday was when we were having technical difficulties, somebody came up and said, maybe I can help. I was a network engineer in my previous life. It can't lock in. It might be. Okay, let's move to the. Let's swap the talks. Let's do the Dan. Meanwhile,
All right, so as you can see, I did not make a mistake in my earlier statement. Oh no! See? I had to be proven wrong. I was almost proven right.
Okay. Okay.
But we'll get you up here soon, Dan. All right.
You'll be the counter on the right.
All right. After you, I'll give you a 5-minute warning, so just look over here once in a while. You have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Is it automatically there? Okay. Okay, so hello everybody, I'm Margherita Favoretto, a graduate student at Technical University of Denmark, and today I'm going to present my master thesis project that is ASI, a backup protocol for Lightning Network wallets. So let me start by giving just a short outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, the problem description, why it is so important and crucial to solve. Then related works, so what has been done before and what is still needed. Some preliminary concepts. I know that all of you, I think, that knows everything about Bitcoin and Lightning, but just to recap some concepts that I'm going to use in my solution. Then the methodology, so which technical aspects and features I've used to achieve my solution. The ASI protocol, so the most interesting part of the presentation with the design and implementation. And then I summarize all the results and some future works. So let's start with the problem description. The problem that my project aims to solve is the lack of a decentralized transless recovery mechanism for Lightning Network wallets in case of failure. To understand how this problem is critical, let's take two scenarios that are like very normal scenarios that all Lightning users can have. For example, here we have Alice. Alice is a Lightning Network user and she manages her funds through her smartphone. But one day she accidentally deleted her applications, and in this way she lost all her channel status. So how can she recover safely her funds? Another case is Bob. Bob is another Lightning Network user, and he has just bought a new smartphone. And he would like to move the Lightning Network application from his previous smartphone to the new one. Very normal. But how can he safely recover his funds? So how it's possible to see is very normal scenarios, but the technology doesn't offer like a solution to solve this issue. In Bitcoin, we have the BIP39 and the BIP32 to solve this problem. But in Lightning, the absence of a ledger and of the BIP39 makes impossible of the recovery of unspent transactions. So as a consequence, we have, for example, no portability among different devices and wallets, and also we don't have any possibilities to recover the funds inside the Lightning network if the device is the major loss. In Lightning Network community, inside the community, some solutions have been proposed, and in my project, I analyzed not all of them, but some of them, and I noticed that it's possible to to group in 3 different categories. The first one that I call third-party backup mechanism. The second one is the self-backup mechanism, and then a third category for L2. In the first category, we have all the Lightning applications that aims to use a cloud service, so an external party, to store all the information related to the channels. It could be a good solution. There are different technologies that use this type of mechanism, but it presents some weaknesses. For example, censorship risk. Maybe the third-party service can be not always available. Decentralization. It doesn't respect the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. Then all security threats like network eavesdropping or DOS attack, and also the privacy. Among the solutions that belong to this group, we have Lightning Wallet, Electrum Wallet, and also Olympus. Then we have another solution that I call self-backup solution, and it's very similar to the previous one, but here we have that is the user that has the responsibility for own backup channels. So, for example, we have also in this case some weaknesses, user experience, cloud services privacy, and also the possibility for users to lose all own data. In this group, we have some technologies, for example, PLN, Breeze, and static backup channels. Then we have another category. It's not the error, the question mark, because L2 is, I decided to put also L2 because it's not something that is like already implemented a Lightning wallet application, but it has a very good idea. So the main idea for L2 is that the 2 sides of a channel share the same commitment. So let's suppose to have Alice and Bob. Alice has just lost all her channels, and maybe she can just ask to Bob to share with her the latest commitment. It could be nice. I mean, Bob can share with Alice the latest commitment and everything is fine. But the problem is that L2 doesn't consider the case in which Bob is not cooperative, so it could be malicious, and sending to Alice an older, a previous channel state. So if then Alice sends to the broadcast to the blockchain this wrong channel status, she can get the LN penalty, and Bob, he can just get all the funds of the channels. So it could be a good solution, but it's not complete. So can we do better? After this analysis, I decided to define some goals that my solution should achieve. For example, decentralized system, it has to maintain the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, so it does not to base on centralized solutions, on third party, on cloud service. It has to guarantee the anonymity, integrity, and confidentiality of data, so it has to prevent unauthorized access or, for example, modifications. It has to be simple, but if is relying on existing concepts already in Lightning or Bitcoin, and also it has to be always available. So every time that a node needs a backup, just send it. So to achieve one of the main goals, so applying minor modifications to the standard protocol, ASI is based on three concepts that are already presented in Lightning Networks and Bitcoin. L2, that we already seen in the related works, watchtowers, and the BIP32, BIP44, and BIP39 in Bitcoin. Okay. I'm a little ashamed now to explain to you how it works, the recovery mechanism for Bitcoin, but just to recap some concepts. I'm not going to go on the details, but for example, wallets is a data structure that is used to store and manage users' key. Then we have, I was focused in my project on deterministic wallet that allows to derive all the keys of the user from a master key that is called TESOD. Then we use HD wallet, that is the most used key derivation, and is also known as BIP32, and permits to have like a tree hierarchy to find all the keys. To make this hierarchy more like specific, we use the BIP44 that specify this derivation path. For example, M is master key, purpose is 44 in this case, coin type is type of cryptocurrency, and account and change address index is more like a focus on the users. Then we have the BIP39 that permits to the users to have, instead of an hexadecimal string as seed, to have a list of 12 or 24 English words as a seed. So in Bitcoin, basically, through the seed, so BIP39, BIP32 that is based on 44, we have all the keys, so the recovery all data. Then we have L2. L2, the main idea of L2 is that the two sides of a channel can share the same commitment. As we've seen before, it's not perfect, so it's a good idea, but it's not complete. Then we have watchtowers. We define watchtowers as full nodes, so always online. And we store L2 channels without being able to access them. And the main functionality of watchtower is monitor status channel when a node is offline. And in the ASI protocol, I use watchtowers as a mechanism of backup. So before to go to ASI protocol, let's see how the watchtower works in Lightning Networks now. So let's suppose that Alice and Bob are connected via payment channels, and Alice uses a watchtower as a monitor functionality service. So every time that Alice and Bob change their status channel, Alice creates a TIX ID, calculates the TIX ID, that is the hash of commitment with Bob. Then she calculates the hint that is equals to the first part of this TIX ID, and a blob. A blob is the encryption of data. Data is the commitment itself, encrypted as with the second part of this TIX ID as a symmetric key. And then Alice sends to the watchtower this pair, hint and blob. Now, let's suppose that Alice is offline and Bob wants to take advantage of this situation to broadcast to the blockchain an older status more favorable for him. So Bob just broadcasts to the blockchain this older status channel. The watchtower can examine this commitment signed by Bob and recognize that the first part of the hash value of that commitment is equals to one of the past hint. So the watchtower can decrypt the data, so the blob corresponding to that hint, and send it to the blockchain, the justice transaction, demonstrating that Bob is cheating. So let's see the methodology. So the ASI protocol design is based on three aspects: the game theory and the serial thinking, the Bitcoin cryptography standard, and Lightning Network community needs and requirements. I think that to work on Bitcoin and Lightning is very important to learn how to think in game theory terms. So to this aim, I was focused on these two papers, formalizing securing relationships on public networks, and a cypherpunk's manifesto. And the main idea of game theory applying cryptography is that the consequences of act dishonestly has to outweigh the benefit to risk and to act dishonestly. As regarding the cryptography, I use the main papers for Bitcoin Lightning, Bitcoin peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and the Bitcoin Lightning Network scalable off-chain instant payments. So I analyze, for example, the public key cryptography, then the blockchaining and the hash cache that make the essence of Lightning and Bitcoin. Then the most crucial part of my methodology was the brainstorming with the Lightning Network community. Last year, I went for 1 month in San Francisco, where I could meet the most expert people of this field. And this helped me to make sure that my work reflects the needs and the requirements of the community. So finally, SI protocol, what is it? So the main idea of the SI protocol is using the watchtowers not just as a monitoring service, but also for backup. So the idea is using the same concepts of the standard format, so with hint, TXID, and blob, and data, but with a different notation to indicate the ASI purpose. So we have int ASI, TXID ASI, blob ASI, and data ASI. The mechanism to find the hint and the blob, is the same, but the unique differences is like the value of TXID and TXID ASI and data ASI. For example, in data, in the standard format is the commitment between two connected nodes. Instead, the data SI is contains the TXID, so the hash commitment with Bob, Eve, and Charlie. So, for example, we have this network, where Alice is connected with Bob, Eve, and Charlie. And the data SI contains the TXID with all the connected nodes. So the idea of a SI protocol is every time that Alice changes channel status between her and one of her connected nodes, it has to send to the watchtower a pair that is a hint and blob, and another pair that is a hint ASI and a blob ASI. And if the Alice can get this TXID blob containing that data ASI, she can calculate the hint, and she can decrypt the blob, obtaining the hash with, for example, Bob, or for example, if she uses Eve with Eve, or Charlie, and so on. So let's see more. One of the problem of this protocol is that we need a value for TXID ASI. So let's imagine that we just lose all our channel status. Which value we still have? So an idea is, for example, use the seed. So for TXID ASI, we decided to adopt the BIP39, BIP32, and also BIP44, but with some modifications. In fact, to derive the TXID ASI, we use a derivation path when the purpose is not 44, but 108. When 108 is an arbitrary number that we use for ASI purpose. So we define the TXID ASI as the double operation, hash operation, on the public key that is derived through this derivation path. Important thing is to notice that the last index of this derivation path is the current block height. So let's see in more details how ASI protocol works. So let's suppose that Alice and Bob just change their status channel. So Alice just send to the watchtower the hint and blob, and then she need to send to the watchtower the hint ASI and blob ASI. So through that derivation path, she can calculate the public key and then the TXID ASI, and then she can calculate also the blob ASI, encrypted all the TXID value of the commitment with Bob, Charlie, and Eve. So, and just send to the watchtower the hint assign and the blob assign. Then let's suppose now that Alice has just lost all her channel status. For example, she can use her seed connected to her connected nodes and request the current block height. Then she can calculate the TX ID assign and the hint assign and ask to the watchtower if contains the hint assign and ask for the corresponding blob assign. If she knows the second part of this TX ID assign, she can decrypt data assign and she can get the TX ID Bob, Charlie, and Eve. So let's suppose that now she has, for example, the TX ID with Bob. So she can calculate the hint Bob and can request to the watchtower if it contains the hint Bob, and in positive case, just request the blob Bob. In this case, Alice, if in case of positive, Alice can get that blob Bob. And through the second part of that TX ID of Bob, she can decrypt the blob Bob and get the data with Bob. So in this way, she gets the backup with Bob. And in the same mechanism, she can use with Eve and Charlie. So I think that most of you have noticed that to achieve this solution, I had to make some assumptions. For example, the query function for the watchtowers. In fact, now it doesn't exist a way to exchange data between a watchtower and Lightning Network. Fees, in fact, the watchtowers needs a fee payment system to make this service largely available. And then also their storage. In fact, I didn't consider the case in which the blob are, for example, substituted or deleted. And then also in my solution, I also suggest to Alice to use more watchtower, and in this case we have also the problem that Alice has to know to which watchtower she send the backup. In my project, I also did a small implementation since nor L2 neither L2 nor watchtower were implemented. I use a Java RMI project. So in this slide, we can see the figure that shows an overview of all the systems. Then we have also a figure of the Java RMI project. And an interesting part of the project was that how the watchtower can store the hint and blob and hint assign blob assign. In my implementation, just use a normal file, but it's very interesting how the watchtower is not able to distinguish between hint and blob and hint assign blob assign. As results, we have, for example, that through the BIP39 and the BIP32, it's possible to have the backup for Bitcoin wallets, but also for Lightning wallets. And also we have the portability for Lightning wallets. So let's conclude. So in this presentation, I demonstrated how ASI protocol permits to have the backup mechanism for Lightning Network wallets. It satisfies all the proposed goals. So it maintains a decentralized system, anonymity, integrity, confidentiality of data. It's simple to implement because it's based on L2, watchtowers, and BIP 32, 39, and 44, and is always available since it's based on watchtowers that are full nodes. And then I also show us through the BIP 39, so the seed, it's possible to have also the recovery for Lightning Network wallets. Since I wrote this project 1 year ago, there was not a formalization for the watchtower. So I proposed a definition that includes also the ASI protocol. So we define watchtower as a full node, always online, that watch for Lightning channel breaches, even at times when your wallet is offline. Watchtowers, by leveraging the ASI protocol, provide a backup service if your Lightning-enabled Bitcoin wallet must be recovered. A possible criticism for this solution is that it's more indicated for frequent users compared to the normal user. In fact, it's a high consumption for a normal user to calculate the TXID assay based on that derivation path, since one new block is created every 10 minutes. So a possible solution is substitute the current block height with a counter, so an integer, and in this way, like to create two versions, one for normal users that in these few steps through a just normal counter can get the derivation path, and one version for more frequent users, for example, a commerce company or very big company with a lot of transactions every 10 minutes, that is like a business version. So I also propose some future works. So for example, create a marketplace on assay protocol. For example, the wallet providers or e-commerce company can offer assay protocol, so the watchtower service, as to their clients in charge of fee. Then also, as I present in the related works, there is not like a Lightning applications that maintains the decentralized network of Bitcoin. So a possible future works is provide a Lightning wallet with assay protocol. Then also it will be nice to introduce an IPFS file. So all the watchtowers can share a unique file. And in this way, we solve two problems. For example, the case in which a watchtower is not available, but also the problem of storage. And then another future works is to find, as I just say, like a version, a trade-off between frequent users and sporadic users. So I want to take advantage of this presentation, to say that this one was my master's thesis project, and so I just graduated from DTU, and I'm also looking for new projects on Lightning networks. So if you have any collaborations, or maybe you are interested on a side, just tell me, and maybe we can talk about to start a collaboration together. So thank you. Do you have any questions? Okay.
See L2 being used in the construction, or SIG has no input?
Yeah. We use L2 for the watchtowers. I decided to use L2. I mean, it's also possible to use Lightning normal channels as today, but I decided to use L2 because I think that maybe it's the future, maybe, and I studied L2, so it was a way to increment also with my solution, and also it permits to have a scalability, so it's you have less information also to store in the watchtowers, just that. Okay.
What can you guarantee about the privacy that the user has when they're accessing their backups? Does the watchtower know that they're accessing their backups or not?
It's just, for example, if Alice sends her backup to the watchtowers, Alice is the unique one that can calculate the TXID assay. So in this way, just Alice can get hint assay and blob assay.
Accessing them when she's getting the backup.
Sorry?
When she's getting the backup.
In the TXID with Bob and the TXID with all connected nodes in her backup.
Do you have any idea to delete the data from watchtower? For example, let's say Alice and Bob has a channel, and they update the state several times. And after that, they close the channel. And in my understanding, watchtower doesn't notice the channel is closed, so watchtower can't delete the data.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
What happens when the channel is closed?
Yeah.
It's just, I didn't analyze that sincerely that situation, but I think that just send to the watchtower the data when the channel is just change. And if you need, first of all, the channel is not closed, just ask to the watchtower. So I didn't analyze the case in which what happened when a channel is closed. But I think that maybe it would be nice also to analyze how the protocol can work. Also, send to the watchtower and another information and say, okay, with Bob this channel is closed. So let's see. I didn't analyze sincerely that situation, but it could be nice.
So if I understood correctly, you send a hint to the watchtower
for
every transaction.
Yeah, I send. I'm sorry.
Isn't it a bandwidth issue?
I send hint asai and 2 pairs, hint and blob, and hint asai and blob asai. I know that, it could be maybe a problem for the storage, is why I also suggest to use IPFS file as a future works, because it could be also solve this problem. But but I think that if you want to backup and also to monitor it, I mean, you have to sacrifice something. So, but maybe it will be another future works, but IPFS file could be nice also because it makes guaranteed that all watchtowers have this file in common, and you can ask to different watchtowers like this.
But I was thinking not so much the storage space, but the bandwidth to send it for every transaction.
Yeah, I didn't analyze this aspect, but it's just that it's a nice way to have all the services, the 2 services. So I think that maybe it's an issue, but it's an issue, but it's like a sort of trade-off.
Shall we continue? Yeah. Let's Interesting stuff. As we can see, there's both a number of technical complexities and probably also economic issues, incentives, and whatnot that need to be worked out for this type of third-party backup redundancy stuff. And now we have one person standing between us and lunch, so no pressure. But next up, we've got Dan Robinson. He is a research partner at Paradigm, where I guess you've been looking at a number of different crypto assets and networks, but in particular, he's going to be talking to us about this Rainbow network. So synthetic assets on Lightning Network. I was thinking about this, and I think rainbow sounds like a really good term because there's no brown in a rainbow, right? So we're not going to have any brown coins in this synthetic asset network, right? It's all going to be really fun, happy, user-friendly synthetic assets. So interested to see what we're going to be able to do, I guess, the next iteration of DeFi, but now on the Lightning Network, right?
Okay.
All right, cool. I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Great, thank you.
The timer will run 25 minutes, and then you have 5 minutes QA.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I work at a crypto asset investment firm called Paradigm, but I'm here representing my own views, and I'll be talking just about how to do synthetic assets on the Lightning Network. So what does that mean? That means you should be able to hold any asset you want. So dollars, you could hold ETH, you could hold positions in the S&P, you could hold gold if that's your speed, and you can hold this in a Lightning channel. And not only can you hold this on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Lightning Network, you can trade it, you can lend and borrow it, you can get leverage on your positions, and you can do this entirely off-chain with transactions that are essentially free. And the best part is you don't even need an oracle. So a lot of the time, when people talk about synthetic assets, they tend to rely on some kind of trusted oracle for prices. You don't even need that in this construction. And also, this construction is just so simple that even I can understand it. I think this is going to be one of the dumbest talks you see here, and as soon as I'm done with it, you'll be like, yeah, that's extremely obvious. But when we start out, I think you look at this and you say, how is this at all possible? So one thing is that we build a lot on what people have done, particularly on Ethereum, where there's been sort of a lot of innovation on building synthetic assets and synthetic positions. But there's some prior work in the Bitcoin space, specifically discrete log contracts, which Draja, Poon, and some others at Mirror worked on. That's a way to do a synthetic position, a derivative on Bitcoin, either on the main chain or maybe within a channel. But it depends on the existence of an oracle that publishes some kind of a price that's represented in some particular way, as a particular kind of signature. So that relies on trusting this particular party to be an oracle. It also relies on somebody who even if both parties trust somebody, they have to actually be publishing their data in this particular format. And so the construction I'm going to be describing here is more limited in some ways, but eliminates that requirement. And I found out also that after this, that Vitalik had already thought of it, but he didn't write it down. So let's talk about what a channel is. So a channel is some position that's backed by some collateral. What kind of collateral? It's Bitcoin. Where's the Bitcoin? It's on chain. What kind of chain? It's on a blockchain. This is just like we just lock up our Bitcoin in some particular position, and then here in payment channel Cloudland, we keep track of who owns what piece of it. So in this case, it's a multi-sig where Alice and Bob own it, and they just you all know how channels work. Why am I explaining this to you? You can just do a really free payment just from Alice to Bob. Really simple update, doesn't require a main chain ledger. And in fact, you just don't need to know how channels work to understand Rainbow. You just need to know that they work, that there's some way for somebody to pay somebody that's off-chain, that isn't expensive. A very cheap way for Alice to make payments to Bob. That's all you need. All right, so now let's talk about synthetics, and particularly just focusing on some of the ways in which has these interesting parallels to channels. So synthetic, what does a synthetic position mean? So I'm sorry, everyone, I'm going to do a little DeFi, dip into some DeFi sort of concepts here, but I promise it's just like the dumbest stuff you'll ever hear, so don't worry about it. Let's suppose we have some Bitcoin collateral locked up on chain. So if it is 10 Bitcoin locked up, then let's suppose Alice and Bob go into this particular position. So Alice, remember, she had 5 Bitcoin. Now she does a trade with Bob. She now has 10 Bitcoin. So Alice has leveraged exposure to Bitcoin. But Alice owes Bob $50,000. Alice is short fiat, short the bankers, short fiat, and this is backed, of course, by her Bitcoin. So ultimately, when they settle, right now at the current price of Bitcoin, if you look at CoinMarketCap up here, that's $10,000. So her current position is worth $50,000, right? Wrong! Why am I denominating this in fucking fiat? Here, we use the Bitcoin standard here. This isn't worth $50,000. It's worth 5 Bitcoin. That's what it's going to settle at. So Bob is going to get 5 of these Bitcoin because that's the value of his $50,000 position. So Bob, remember, is holding USD on Bitcoin, but when it gets settled, he's going to get some of the Bitcoin. So now let's see what happens when these prices change. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I knew it was a good idea to join a crypto hedge fund. Take that, Mom. All right, so what has happened now? Alice is in a great position. She's going to be getting more Bitcoin than she otherwise would have because the price of Bitcoin has gone up. Bob still has a stable balance in fiat, but what does that matter? The only thing that really matters is stacking sats, and here he's at only 2.5 Bitcoin. So Bob's Bitcoin position has gone down, but he's still maintained the same dollar exposure, which for whatever reason is what he wanted. All right. Oh no. Oh no. What has happened here? The price of Bitcoin has gone down to $5,000. Now, what's happened is Bob, who had this $50,000 position in USD, that now is just all of the Bitcoin in the channel. So Alice, when we settle this channel, now would get 0 Bitcoin out. So one thing is that if the price of Bitcoin goes any lower, Alice is going to be in a position where, Bob is going to be in a position where he can't get any more from Alice. So now Bob, at this point, suddenly becomes exposed to the price of Bitcoin. He doesn't lose value exactly, but he loses the exposure that he wanted. So at this point, Bob would want to close this position, most likely. All right, so why did I describe both these things to you? Well, we're going to do something where we combine channels and synthetics. And so first I'm going to explain to you how that works and what it gives you. And then I'm going to talk about how it's enabled, like how it works mechanically. And what's nice is, really cool, is that doing this on channels lets you do something that you just couldn't do on the main chain. Because of just the cost of doing main chain transactions. So doing this in a channel not only it makes it really efficient to trade these, it also just enables this entire synthetic construct to be done on Bitcoin. So, all right, rainbow channels. This is a construction where, okay, we have, remember we had some Bitcoin on chain, and Alice and Bob have positions in a channel. And usually, Alice has like some amount of Bitcoin exposure, but look, we talked about it before, Bob can have some USD exposure. And this, again, is going to settle in Bitcoin, but while it's open, it's supposed to maintain the price of USD. So, they can hold basically any positions they want. And as long as they're sort of sufficiently collateralized by all just BTC on the main chain, they should be able to exit with these positions. So if we look at, say, Alice and Bob just starting out with just plain Bitcoin, they can actually do a trade where here they enter into this situation. Here I've added an interest rate where over time Alice is going to be paying Bob for the privilege of borrowing USD from him. And so this is off-chain trading. This is off-chain just like BitMEX. Speaking of BitMEX, Alice is effectively shorting USD here by borrowing it. And in another sense, she's getting leverage on BTC. Whereas Bob here is earning yield on his just holding a USD position. So we now have DeFi on Bitcoin once we figure out how to get this to work. Okay, that part is done. Udi is so triggered right now. It's okay. So that part is done. Now the question is like, how does this actually work on Bitcoin? We don't have any smart contracts. We all know this. And how does it work, especially without a price oracle to tell us how much these things are worth? So it's like sort of just the simplest damn construction you could possibly imagine. This is just a payment channel. If you remember how these work, it's a bidirectional payment channel between Alice and Bob, and that's all we need. This could be a Bitcoin payment channel. This could be a payment channel on anything that supports payment channels, as long as you can do cheap bidirectional payments. Yeah, I mean, this could be on Venmo. This could be tossing pennies across the Grand Canyon. It really doesn't matter. As long as someone can make sort of cheap payments to the other, you can actually construct this synthetics this way. Okay, so how does this work? So we were joking before about how fast Bitcoin goes up and down, but like in actual fact, the price moves. It goes up, it goes down, but it's at least a little bit smooth. And we're going to take advantage of that position, of that property, in order to implement rainbow channels on Bitcoin. Okay, so remember, starting out, they each have a position where Alice has this leverage position, Bob has a $50,000 position. The current values of their position are 5 Bitcoin and 5 Bitcoin, right? All right, so let's just do one tick, just one moment in time. The price of Bitcoin has gone up by $1. Let's say this happens every 5 seconds. So just 5 seconds later, the price of Bitcoin has gone up by $1. In response, Alice's position is now worth just 0.0005 Bitcoin more than it was before, and Bob's position is worth 0.0005 Bitcoin less. So Bob, to settle this, Bob can just make a 0.0005 Bitcoin payment to Alice. Why would Bob do this? Because Bob wants to maintain the channel for sort of the long term. Bob is earning interest on it, or he wants this USD position. He could cheat Alice, but he can only cheat her for 0.0005 Bitcoin, just the value of that most recent price move. And assuming they do this often enough and the positions aren't too volatile, they can maybe keep this within whatever trust parameters they care to. So in this case here, Bob has now they've updated this channel based on the movement in this price, and Bob was incentivized to do so because again he wants to keep the channel open. All right, so the price of Bitcoin has gone back down. Alice now just makes a payment back to Bob. They just look at what their updated balances are, and Alice makes a payment back to Bob. And again, there's no sort of third-party oracle they both have to be using. They just have to have some way that they agree on a price. So if Alice just maybe has her sources that she cares about for Bitcoin price, and Bob has his sources, as long as they sort of reach something that's close enough, they can settle these payments. And that price doesn't have to come in, even if they decide to use CoinMarketCap, the price doesn't have to come in some kind of like cryptographically signed way. It can just be anything that Alice can read, that Alice and Bob can just sort of both look at and say, okay, this is a number. All right, so the price of Bitcoin, we've crossed the $10,000 threshold, which I hear is a key support level. But alas, so Alice at this point now pays 0.0005 Bitcoin to Bob because Bob's position is worth a little more in our unit of account. Okay, so that's how we implement it. All it takes is it can be done entirely on top of payment channels. Notice there's no Bitcoin script in there. There was no like upgrades to Lightning that are needed. All it needs is to have just a bidirectional payment channel. Actually, it doesn't even need that. If Alice and Bob are just connected to each other over the Lightning Network and can make payments to each other, they could do this. It might be a little more expensive in terms of fees to do all these payments, so it's probably best for them to have a channel. But if you wanted to, Alice and Bob could maintain this position over the Lightning Network, just making Lightning payments instead of making individual payment channel payments. All right, so what is the Rainbow Network? Remember, we've got Alice and Bob with this position. Now, Alice has a channel with Bob, and Alice wants to do some particular trade. Suppose Alice is just a user. Bob right now has to take the opposite sides of those trades, whether or not he wants to. Maybe Bob doesn't want to be short Bitcoin for obvious reasons. So what does Bob do in order to hedge this position? Bob wants to basically have this trade with Alice, offer this service to Alice, maybe for an interest rate or maybe just charging a spread to Alice. But Bob doesn't want the exposure that is being on the opposite side with Alice. Bob can just go find someone else, like Charlie, and then Bob, you see here, is just on the opposite side of this channel, has the exact opposite exposure. So Bob is just neutral. Bob has whatever position, sort of net position he wants to have. Alice doesn't even have to know about Charlie. These channels don't have to interact with each other in any way other than just Bob knowing that he has this hedge position. Of course, if Bob wants, he could also go hedge on BitMEX. He could go hedge just like holding physical assets. He can do whatever he wants, but a convenient way to hedge maybe is do it in another channel. So this connection, this rainbow connection, that's new. All right, rainbow connection. This rainbow connection, that's cool, between these two assets enables hedging. So Bob here now is hedged as a result of having these two channels where he's opposite positions, and that is our rainbow network. Okay, there are some limitations and downsides in this approach. So users have to be online for the entire period of time that they want their positions to be updating, to not just be Bitcoin positions. That could mean every 5 seconds if they want to be really not trust each other. That could be like once a minute or something. And there's ways, maybe to recover if someone comes back online after being offline. I don't know. You can sort of determine this. It's not, you have to be online to receive Lightning payments anyway. And so I sort of imagine this largely being something that users that are online sort of would be doing anyway. But you also have to be signing these transactions. There's a little bit of cost to that. Users do need to agree on a price. So again, this doesn't have to come, they don't have to have the same source. They don't have to have an oracle that comes in a cryptographic form. But they have to do something where they each know when their position has gone up and down in value within some margin of error to allow them to actually settle as the price ticks back and forth. So unlike in some synthetic positions ideas on Ethereum, the counterparty can exit this position at any time just by ceasing to update the channel. They could close the channel or they can just stop updating it. And at that point, you become immediately exposed to Bitcoin. There are worse things in the world. But you maybe have to go hedge your position that you thought you had up until this very moment. You got to go hedge it somewhere else, maybe on another Rainbow channel. It's kind of capital inefficient, especially so that the hedging thing, the downside of the hedging thing I described earlier, is that now Bob is sort of locking up capital in these two different channels, really just sort of in order to allow Alice and Charlie to have these trades against each other that they would like to have against each other. And so that's somewhat capital inefficient, added on to the general capital inefficiencies of just bilateral payment channel networks. So there's potentially ways to improve this, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how to do that on Bitcoin. So if you want to check out the paper that describes this, the paper also describes a way to do trustless Bitcoin trading in an Ethereum payment channel using SPV proofs. So if you check that out, is that scaling Bitcoin? I guess that's a way of scaling Bitcoin. You can check it out at rainbownet.work. So this, like I mentioned, you can implement this entirely on top of the Lightning Network. I don't know anyone who's fully done that yet. I would love if you do that. Let me know. I'm not gonna build it, but definitely interested in seeing anyone's sort of approach to it, because I don't think it's necessarily that complicated. Like or at least there's sort of like a lot of subtleties in it that I'm probably not really capable of solving. But it's more or less a pretty, like I said, a very simple idea. You can reach me at Dan Robinson on Twitter if you have any questions. But that's the best way to reach me. Also, I'm going to plug. I got a new paper out last week called the Yield Protocol. So if all this DeFi was not too much for you and you want more, I would recommend checking out that paper as well. Thank you. Are there any questions?
So, price discovery is a bit more complex than two people just talking, right?
What do you mean?
Like typically in markets, price discovery happens because multiple parties are interacting with multiple parties. That's how price discovery comes through.
This resembles more like an OTC market, where you might, so I would sort of imagine there being market makers who enter into these trades, and it's a very good question, because yeah, this is all happening bilaterally, but there is precedent in the financial markets for these markets that are like largely OTC, largely someone just sort of like offering a price with a particular spread, and then they know that they can go hedge it somewhere else. So you can sort of get price discovery from just how all those shake out. But yeah, certainly it's a different market structure from how you'd imagine just an exchange working.
How do you resolve the issue where, let's just say Alice and Bob have this contract. Bob, they understand, like Alice knows, like if event X happens, the price goes up, Alice benefits. If event X doesn't happen, Bob benefits. So basically, if it moves in Alice's disfavor, then she just goes offline and doesn't sign. How do you resolve this issue?
That's a great point. It's something I probably should have mentioned. This is a very bad idea when it's certainly a bad idea when the asset's extremely volatile, and it's especially bad when it's something like betting. I'm trying to think of like an example where something just sort of comes out immediately. But like even like a coin flip, right? If you were to bet on like the Super Bowl coin flip, it's not like over time sort of heads gradually goes up until suddenly it settles at 100%. It's just like 50-50 until there's just sharp discontinuity, and then there's sort of a moment where it's certain. That's a bad case for using this, absolutely.
I guess I'm thinking of even, completely non-volatile something-ish. You have to solve the initial case where it moves in somebody's disfavor, and if it does move in their disfavor, then they just don't sell.
Yeah, so that's the most that they can steal is just from like sort of the optionality of a moment's price movement. So either you need to trust your counterparty by that amount, which could be it could be as small as you want to make it, and it could be smaller than even like the fees from closing the channel, the fees from opening the channel, or you can make it small. What are they saying? Yes, that works.
If you had, like, let's just say a sine function where it pushed one way and then went in the other,
right.
It would be you could get a counterparty to push all these payments to you, but then as soon as it starts swinging the other direction.
That's certainly true, but at each step, if you assume it's just geometric Brownian motion, at each step, like the price ticks one way, as long as the party thinks it's just as likely to move back down in my favor. Well, yes, that's the other thing I was going to say. If you think your counterparty just really wants to stay in the position because they want to hold this exposure that they bought, or if they're receiving interest rate or fees or something from it, in order just to maintain this position, they have to supply this, satisfy this margin call, the settlement.
Okay, so you are trusting, Alice is trusting Bob, but that's okay because she's trusting him for a very small amount and updating the trust level in real time. But the problem with small amount is that they add up. So if you assume a guy like Bob who is creating a small amount of trust level channels with many people and doing periodically exit scams, that's a very realistic scenario. Like if this system is actually implemented, I can imagine parties that actually build some kind of trust over time and then actually scam a lot of people of small amounts in a way to make it convenient. And that's basically,
Maybe, I think the amount could be bounded as small as you want it to be. You can, it's a very real concern. And if people are familiar, I did a talk on Interledger at the Stanford Blockchain Conference that talks about a very similar idea in packetized payments, where instead of doing HTLCs for multi-hop payments, you do these tiny payments and trust your immediate counterparty for the duration of that payment. And the same kind of question comes up there. I think in practice it would actually be pretty hard to pull off this exit scam, in that you'd be getting sort of a very small amount from a bunch of different parties who opened a channel with you. And if you're the more trusted party, for example, in the channel, most likely you're going to be charging the other party a fee. So to do so, I think you can bound this at some point where it just becomes similar to how in Lightning someone has to pay the fees on the channel when it closes, right? So you can grief somebody by forcing them to pay fees that they wouldn't sort of want to pay. But we just say that's just sort of the cost of doing business. You shouldn't be opening a channel with somebody if you don't trust them up to 50 cents a dollar value. And often I think it'll be much more than that. I would trust Casa for more. I don't know.
Do you manually have to approve every little payment? Or?
I'm sorry? No, hopefully not manually. So you set up something on your computer that refreshes CoinMarketCap and just checks what the price is, and then it does the logic for you. Hopefully uses a few more sources. Cool. All right, thanks everybody. It's time for lunch.